My husband looked at me while I was basting the Christmas turkey and said, "My ex is coming to dinner with us tonight," as if he were telling me we had run out of butter. For a moment, the kitchen went so quiet I could hear the old wall clock ticking above the pantry door. The snow outside had started falling softly over Lancaster County, covering the driveway, the porch steps, and the little row of boxwood bushes Richard and I had planted 29 Christmases ago. I was 67 years old, wearing the red apron my granddaughter Lily had given me, with flour on one sleeve and cranberry sauce warming on the stove. The whole house smelled like sage, roasted turkey, brown sugar, and cinnamon. It should have felt like home. Instead, my own kitchen suddenly felt like a room I had entered without permission. I turned off the burner under the gravy before it could boil over. "Your ex," I said quietly. Richard leaned against the kitchen island in his navy sweater, looking strangely pleased with himself. "Patricia is alone this year. It would be cruel to leave her sitting by herself on Christmas." He said her name gently, softer than he had said mine in months. Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law Brooke walked in carrying a crystal bowl she had never once offered to wash. She smiled at me the way people smile when they already know they have won something. "It's just dinner, Margaret," she said. "Try not to make it awkward for everyone." That was the second cut. Not loud, not dramatic, just clean enough to tell me this had been discussed before I was invited into the conversation. My son Daniel stood in the doorway behind her, holding a bottle of sparkling cider, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had known too. The realization settled over me colder than the air leaking in from the back door. I looked at the dining room beyond them. 8 places already set with my best china. Cloth napkins folded into little trees. Silver candlesticks polished until my hands ached. A centerpiece of pine branches, oranges, and red ribbon I had made that morning because Richard always used to say store-bought decorations had no soul. I had spent 3 days preparing this dinner. I had driven 12 miles to get the pecans Daniel liked for pie. I had wrapped gifts for Brooke even though she never thanked me without looking at the price tag first. I had placed Richard's chair at the head of the table, the same place he had sat for 42 years. Now he wanted to bring another woman to that table, and everyone expected me to smile wide enough to make the insult look like hospitality. I wiped my hands slowly on a dish towel. Richard watched me, waiting for tears, perhaps, or a sharp word he could later call unreasonable. Brooke tilted her chin, already preparing to be offended on his behalf. But I had spent a lifetime learning how to survive disappointment without giving it a performance. So I opened the cabinet, took down one more dinner plate, and set it carefully on the counter. "Then I'll set one more place," I said. Richard relaxed, mistaking my calm for surrender. Brooke's smile widened. Daniel finally looked up, and for 1 second I saw shame cross his face before he buried it again. I carried the extra plate into the dining room and placed it beside Richard's chair, exactly where Patricia Caldwell would sit when she arrived. Then I adjusted the fork, straightened the napkin, and looked at my wedding ring under the chandelier light. It no longer looked like a promise. It looked like evidence. What they did not know was that 3 weeks earlier, the bank had called me about a question Richard had no business asking. What they did not know was that my lawyer had already sent me copies of documents Richard had apparently forgotten existed. And what they absolutely did not know was that the woman they expected to humiliate at Christmas dinner had already learned to stop asking why people betrayed her and start asking what they were planning to take next. I carried the extra plate back to the dining room like it weighed 10 pounds, though it was only bone china, white with a thin gold rim. My mother had given me that set the first Christmas after Richard and I bought the house. Back then, we could barely afford the mortgage, and the dining room had nothing in it but a folding table, for mismatched chairs, and a second-hand hutch with one drawer that stuck every time I opened it. Richard used to laugh when it jammed. He would come up behind me, kiss the top of my head, and say, "One day, Maggie, this room will be full." For many years, it was. It was full of neighbors dropping by with cookies, children running through the hallway in pajamas, Daniel leaving toy cars under the table, Richard singing old carols off-key while hanging lights along the porch. Every Christmas Eve, no matter how tired he was, he drove us to the candlelight service at the little stone church 5 miles away. He held my hand during Silent Night. He always squeezed once at the final verse. That was our language. 1 squeeze meant, "I am here." 2 meant, "I know." 3 meant, "I love you." I used to think a marriage survived because of grand promises. Later, I learned it survived because of tiny habits repeated until they became the walls around your life. Then, one by one, Richard stopped repeating them. The first year after retirement, he said the porch lights were too much trouble. The next year, he said the church parking lot was too crowded. Then he stopped helping me choose a tree, stopped asking what Daniel wanted for Christmas, stopped sitting with me after dinner to watch the old movies we had seen 100 times. He started calling my traditions your little routines, as if they belonged to me alone, as if he had not built half of them with his own hands. I told myself men changed when work no longer gave shape to their days. I told myself he felt old and did not know where to put that fear. I told myself many gentle lies because the truth was too cold to hold. Brooke noticed the distance before I admitted it. She began speaking to Richard in that bright, flattering voice she used when she wanted something. She praised his stories even when he repeated them. She asked his opinion on investments, restaurants, paint colors, retirement communities. With me, her voice grew thinner. Margaret likes things the old way, she would say, smiling across the room. Margaret gets overwhelmed by change. Daniel never corrected her. That hurt more than I allowed myself to show. A son does not have to shout to abandon his mother. Sometimes he only has to stay silent while someone else moves her chair farther from the table. That evening, as I straightened Patricia's place setting, I looked at the little crystal angels lined along the mantel. Daniel had made one of them in 2nd grade, all crooked wings and glue marks. I had kept it for 31 years. I wondered when my family had started seeing devotion as weakness. I wondered when being steady had become the same as being invisible. From the kitchen, I heard Richard ask Brooke whether the champagne was chilled. Champagne. For a guest I had not invited. For a woman he had not mentioned until the turkey was already in the oven. I touched the back of Richard's chair, remembering the man who once shoveled our elderly neighbor's driveway before sunrise and left without taking credit. I did not know where that man had gone. Maybe he had vanished slowly, or maybe I had loved an older version of him so faithfully that I failed to notice the new one taking his place. Outside, headlights turned into our driveway, sweeping across the dining room window. Brooke hurried to the front door before I could move. Richard smoothed his sweater. Daniel stared at his shoes. I stood beside the table I had spent my life filling, and for the first time that Christmas, I understood that dinner had never been meant to include me. I was only expected to serve it. Brooke opened the front door with the kind of excitement she never showed when I arrived at her house for Sunday lunch. Cold air rushed through the hallway, carrying the clean smell of snow and pine, and then Patricia Caldwell stepped inside as if she had been expected for years. She was tall, still elegant, with silver blonde hair swept neatly behind one ear and a cream-colored coat that looked too delicate for Pennsylvania weather. In one hand, she carried a bottle of champagne wrapped in gold foil. In the other, a small gift bag with red tissue paper curling over the top. "Richard," she said, stretching his name into something private. He crossed the room faster than I had seen him move all month. He took her coat himself. He touched her elbow as she stepped out of her boots. Not in a dramatic way. Not enough for anyone to accuse him of anything. Just enough for me to notice that his hand remembered where to go. Brooke kissed Patricia on the cheek. "Trish, you made it. I was worried about the roads." Trish. Not Mrs. Caldwell. Not Patricia. Trish. My daughter-in-law had a nickname for the woman I had just learned was coming to my Christmas table. Daniel shifted beside the staircase and gave Patricia a strained smile. "Good to see you," he said, though his voice made it clear he did not know what else to say. Patricia looked past all of them and finally saw me standing in the dining room doorway with my hands folded in front of my apron. Her smile softened into something careful. "Margaret," she said, "thank you for having me." That was the clever part. She said it as if I had invited her. She placed the thank you directly in my hand, so if I refused it, I would look small. I had known women like that before. They did not shove. They arranged the room until you found yourself standing in a corner. "Merry Christmas, Patricia," I said. "Dinner is almost ready." Her eyes traveled over the table, the candles, the china, the extra plate beside Richard's chair. For half a second, surprise flickered across her face. She had expected discomfort. Perhaps she had expected me to scramble. Instead, I had given her a seat so precisely prepared it made the insult impossible to hide. Richard cleared his throat. "Patricia always loved your cooking," he said, as if that made any sense at all. I turned toward him slowly. She has had it before? The question landed quietly, but the hallway changed. Brooke stopped unwrapping the champagne. Daniel looked at his father. Patricia's smile held, but her fingers tightened around the gift bag. Richard blinked once. Years ago, he said. At some company picnic, I think. I remembered every company picnic. I remembered packing deviled eggs in a cooler, wiping mustard from Daniel's face, sitting alone on a blanket while Richard laughed with people whose names he never brought home. Maybe Patricia had been there. Maybe she had always been there in the background of my marriage, a face I had not known to fear. Before that silence could settle, a little voice came from the living room. Lily, my 8-year-old granddaughter, came around the corner in her green velvet dress, holding the stuffed reindeer I had bought her. Grandma, she said, looking up at Brooke, not me. Is Miss Trish the lady who might live closer soon? Brooke's face changed so quickly that only another woman would have caught it. Patricia looked down at her shoes. Richard gave a short laugh that did not belong in the room. Children repeat everything, he said. I smiled at Lily and touched her shoulder gently. They also tell the truth without knowing it, sweetheart. No one answered that. Brooke sent Lily back to the living room with a cookie and a voice too bright to be natural. I walked into the kitchen to check the turkey, but I did not need to. It was done. Everything was done. The food, the table, the pretending. Behind me, I heard Patricia laugh at something Richard said, and I recognized the sound of a woman being welcomed into a space another woman had spent decades building. I opened the oven, let the heat touch my face, and counted slowly to 5. Then I lifted the roasting pan with both hands, steady as stone, because if they wanted me to serve them Christmas dinner, I would. But I would also listen to every word they were foolish enough to say while sitting at my table. By the time I carried the turkey into the dining room, everyone had arranged themselves without asking me. Richard sat at the head of the table, his shoulders squared in that old confident way he used when signing checks or making announcements at church fundraisers. Patricia sat to his right, exactly where I had placed the extra setting, her champagne glass already filled. Brooke sat beside Daniel, but her body leaned toward Patricia as if loyalty had a physical direction. Lily and her younger brother Mason were at the far end, whispering over their napkins, too young to understand the strange weather moving through the room. My own place had been moved. Not far, only 2 seats down, closer to the kitchen doorway. Brooke looked up when I noticed. I thought this would be easier for serving, she said lightly. Easier. Such a gentle word for being moved away from the life I had built. I set the turkey down in front of Richard because no one reached to help me. The platter was heavy, the skin golden, the herbs tucked around it just the way he liked. But his eyes were on Patricia, not the meal. This looks wonderful, Maggie, he said, using the old nickname as if it cost him nothing. Patricia smiled. He told me you were always good at making holidays beautiful. Always good at making things beautiful. Not loved. Not cherished. Useful. I sat in the chair Brooke had chosen for me and placed my napkin in my lap. The candlelight moved across the faces around the table, softening every expression except the ones I now understood too clearly. Brooke lifted her glass first. I just want to say how nice it is to have everyone together, she said. Christmas is about forgiveness, fresh starts, and being brave enough to welcome happiness in whatever form it comes. Daniel stared into his plate. Richard nodded as if she had said something profound. Patricia lowered her eyes modestly, but the corner of her mouth lifted. I watched them turn my dinner into a ceremony for my replacement. Richard began carving the turkey with the silver knife my father had given us on our 10th anniversary. His hands trembled slightly, but not from age. From excitement. Patricia and I were just talking about the Christmas dance back in 1974, he said. Remember those ridiculous blue lights in the school gym? Patricia laughed, touching her necklace. And you wore that brown jacket your mother hated. Richard laughed too. A full warm laugh I had not heard across our breakfast table in years. I thought I looked sharp. You did, she said. You always did. Brooke smiled as if she were watching a sweet old movie. That is so romantic, she said. Romantic. At my Christmas table. In front of my grandchildren. In front of the man who had promised to honor me through every season of our lives. I cut a small piece of turkey and chewed slowly, though it tasted like paper. Richard leaned back, warmed by attention. Sometimes I think about how different everything could have been if I had made different choices. No one moved. Even Lily stopped swinging her feet under the table. There it was. Not an accident. not a careless memory. A public confession wrapped in nostalgia and served beside cranberry sauce. Brooke reached for the rolls, pretending not to hear the cruelty in it. Patricia looked down at her plate, but she did not look ashamed. Daniel finally whispered, "Dad." Richard waved one hand. "I am only being honest." I placed my fork beside my plate. The sound was small, silver against china, but it seemed to travel the length of the table. "Honesty is a serious thing, Richard," I said. "Most people only admire it when it costs someone else something." Patricia blinked. Brooke's smile tightened. Richard frowned, surprised that I had spoken at all. I did not raise my voice. I did not mention the bank call, or the documents in my desk drawer, or the email I had printed that morning and tucked inside a cream envelope beneath the buffet linens. I only reached for the gravy boat and passed it to Patricia with both hands steady. "Please," I said, "have some more. You came all this way." She took it carefully, as if it might burn her. Around us, the candles burned lower. Outside, snow kept falling over the driveway, covering every tire track, every footprint, every sign of who had arrived. But inside that room, nothing was covered anymore. After the plates were cleared, I began carrying dishes to the kitchen because old habits can become invisible chains. No one asked me to sit. No one said I had cooked for 3 days and should rest. Richard took Patricia into the family room to show her the fireplace he had rebuilt with my father one summer. Brooke opened another bottle of champagne and laughed too loudly at something Daniel did not say. I rinsed the carving knife under warm water and watched the grease slide down the drain in thin golden lines. The kitchen window reflected me back to myself, a woman in a red apron, silver hair pinned neatly, cheeks pale from holding her face still too long. I looked like someone waiting to be dismissed from her own life. Then Mason spilled apple cider on his sweater, and Brooke called from the dining room, "Margaret, do you have more napkins? The good cloth ones, not the paper ones." The good cloth ones were in the laundry room cabinet beside the back staircase. I dried my hands and walked down the short hallway, grateful for 10 seconds away from their voices. The laundry room was dim except for the little bulb above the washer. The dryer hummed softly, tumbling a load of dish towels I had started before dinner. I opened the cabinet and reached for the stack of red napkins, but before I could turn around, I heard footsteps stop outside the half-open door. Brooke's voice came first, low and sharp. "You need to be careful tonight. She hears more than Richard thinks." Patricia answered in a whisper, but the hallway carried every word. "I'm not trying to upset her. I just want to know where things stand." Brooke gave a small laugh. "Where things stand is that Richard is ready. After New Year, he is meeting with the lawyer. He thinks if Margaret signs the paperwork quietly, the house can be refinanced before spring." My hand tightened around the napkins. For a moment, the dryer seemed to grow louder, like a heartbeat trapped in a metal box. Patricia said, "And Daniel?" Brooke sighed. "Daniel will do what he always does. Nothing. He hates conflict. Besides, he knows we need the inheritance sorted sooner rather than later. This place is worth a fortune now. 6 bedrooms, 2 acres, close to town. It makes no sense for one old woman to sit on it alone. One old woman. Not mother. Not wife. Not grandmother. Just a problem taking up square footage." Patricia lowered her voice even more. "Richard told me Margaret would probably move to Florida. Some retirement community. She will if we present it correctly," Brooke said. "Make it about safety. Stairs, winter, maintenance. She gets emotional when people make her feel like a burden. That is the angle." I stood behind the door with the napkins pressed against my chest and felt something inside me go very still. There are moments when pain is so complete it stops burning. It becomes clear. Brooke was not simply rude. Patricia was not simply lonely. Richard was not simply foolish. They had made a plan for my house, my marriage, my future, and they had wrapped it in concern so I would feel guilty for resisting. I looked down at the red cloth in my hands. I had ironed those napkins that morning while humming "Oh Holy Night." I had thought the hardest part of the evening would be surviving Patricia's smile. I had been wrong. The hardest part was realizing how long they must have believed I was too sentimental to protect myself. Brooke's heels clicked away first. Patricia followed after a pause. I waited until the hallway was empty, then closed the cabinet with care. Not a slam. Not a sound that would warn them. I took the napkins back to the dining room and placed them beside Brooke's glass. "Here you go," I said. She looked at me quickly, searching my face. I gave her nothing. That was when I decided not to confront them in the laundry room, not at the sink, not in front of the children. People like Brooke depended on a woman's pain becoming messy. They needed tears to call her unstable. They needed anger to call her bitter. I had given my family 42 years of warmth. For the rest of that night, I would give them manners. And after that, I would give them the truth in a form they could not laugh away. I returned to the kitchen with the empty dessert plates and let the warm water run over my hands until my fingers stopped trembling. In the family room, Richard was telling Patricia about the year the basement flooded and how he had stayed up all night with a shop vacuum. He left out the part where I spent the next morning on my knees with towels, saving Daniel's baby pictures from damp cardboard boxes. Men like Richard had a way of remembering effort only when it made them look noble. Brooke came in once to ask where I kept the coffee cups, though she had opened that same cabinet every Christmas for 12 years. She wanted to see my face. I gave her the face of a hostess concerned about sugar and cream. That was all. When she left, I wiped the counter in slow circles and thought about the phone call from Fulton Bank 3 weeks earlier. A young man named Eric had asked whether I had authorized Richard to request information about a home equity line of credit connected to the property. I had been standing in the grocery store parking lot when he called, a bag of oranges on the passenger seat and sleet tapping against the windshield. For a few seconds, I thought I had misunderstood him. Then he read the address. My address. My house. The house my father had protected after Richard's hardware business failed 18 years ago. I thanked Eric, drove home at 30 miles per hour, and sat in the driveway with the engine running until my coffee went cold. The next morning, I called Howard Miller, the family attorney who had handled my father's estate. Howard was 72, careful, and impossible to rush. When I told him what had happened, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Margaret, you need to come in." In his office, with law books behind him and a poinsettia wilting on the windowsill, Howard placed a folder in front of me. Inside were copies of the trust, the deed, and an amendment Richard had signed after his business debts nearly cost us everything. I remembered that day, though Richard apparently did not. He had been ashamed, angry, and desperate to keep creditors away from our home. My father agreed to help only if the house went fully into my separate family trust. Richard signed because he had no choice then. Pride becomes very flexible when money is involved. The document was clear. He could live in the house as my husband, but he could not sell it, borrow against it, transfer it, or force me out. Not then. Not now. Not ever. Howard also showed me something else. Someone had requested a copy of the old marital property summary through a third party. Not legally dangerous by itself, he said, but suspicious when paired with the bank inquiry. I had not told Richard that I knew. I had not told Daniel. I had simply gone home and begun watching. I saved Brooke's messages when she asked odd questions about square footage and property taxes. I printed the email where she suggested I might be more comfortable somewhere easier to manage. I checked the small security camera Daniel had installed in the kitchen hallway last winter after packages went missing from the porch. It recorded audio when motion triggered it. Daniel had forgotten. Brooke had never known. I knew. So while they laughed over coffee in my family room, while Patricia complimented the mantel garland I had arranged before sunrise, I dried the last plate and opened the narrow drawer beneath the buffet. The cream envelope was still there under the linen runner, sealed, flat, patient. I placed my palm over it for one quiet second. Paper does not shout. Paper does not cry. Paper waits until foolish people have finished exposing themselves. Then it speaks in a voice no one can interrupt. After coffee was poured, Richard tapped his spoon lightly against his cup, not loud enough to be rude, but enough to make the room obey him. I was standing beside the buffet with the cream envelope hidden beneath my left hand. The children had gone upstairs to watch a Christmas movie in the guest room, their small footsteps fading above us. Only the adults remained, Richard in his chair by the fire, Patricia sitting close enough for their sleeves to touch, Brooke perched on the edge of the sofa with a folder on her lap, Daniel near the window with his arms crossed and his face turned toward the snow. The room looked peaceful if you did not know how to read it. The tree lights blinked softly. The stockings hung in a neat row. The fire moved behind the glass screen. Everything in that room had been chosen, cleaned, mended, or preserved by my hands. Richard cleared his throat. "Margaret, I think we should talk while everyone is here." Brooke lowered her eyes in a performance of concern. Patricia held her champagne glass with both hands. Daniel looked up quickly. Dad, maybe not tonight. Richard gave him a patient smile, the kind a man gives when he has decided another person's discomfort is childish. No, son. Christmas is exactly the right time for honesty. Families should not keep pretending. I folded the edge of the linen runner between my fingers and said nothing. He turned to me. Your mother and I have been living separate lives for a long time. Your mother, not my wife. He had demoted me before the sentence was finished. We care about each other, he continued. But care is not the same as happiness. Patricia coming here tonight has reminded me that life is short, and at our age, we should not waste the years we have left. At our age, he used my age like a polite shovel, trying to bury me with it. Brooke reached into her folder and slid several papers onto the coffee table. We all want this to be handled gently, she said. No one is trying to hurt anyone. People always say that while holding the knife made of paperwork. I walked over slowly and looked down. There were printed listings for senior apartments in Florida and North Carolina, a brochure for a gated retirement community near Tampa, and a handwritten note about selling or refinancing the house by spring. My name was spelled correctly on every page. Somehow that made it worse. Brooke had taken the time to spell my name right while planning where to put me. Richard leaned forward. The house is too much for you, Maggie. The stairs, the winter maintenance, the taxes. This could be a fresh start. You always liked warm weather. I had liked one beach vacation in 1998 because Daniel was 12 and built sand castles until sunset. That had become, in Richard's mouth, evidence that I should leave Pennsylvania, my church, my friends, my grandchildren, and the only home that still carried my father's fingerprints in the porch railing. Patricia spoke then, softly. I know this is difficult, Margaret, but sometimes letting go is the kindest thing we can do for ourselves. I looked at her for a long moment. She wore pearl earrings, tasteful makeup, and the calm expression of a woman encouraging another woman to surrender cleanly. And what exactly would I be letting go of? I asked. Richard exhaled as though I was making the simple complicated. The house, eventually. Not tonight, but soon. Brooke has found some lovely options. Daniel and Brooke could help manage the transition, and I would make sure you were comfortable. Comfortable. Another gentle word. Like easier. Like fresh start. Like safety. Daniel finally stepped away from the window. Mom has not even agreed to any of this. Brooke turned on him. We are trying to protect her. His face flushed, but he did not answer. That silence hurt, but it no longer surprised me. Richard looked at me with the confidence of a man who believed my love had made me harmless. I am asking you to be reasonable. I picked up the folder, turned one page, then another. The paper was warm from the fire. I saw notes in Brooke's handwriting beside one apartment listing. Affordable, quiet, far enough. Far enough from what? I wondered. From the house? Or from the shame of watching me remain in it? I closed the folder and placed it back on the table. Is this what you really want, Richard? He glanced at Patricia, then at Brooke, then back at me. That was all the answer I needed before he even spoke. Yes, he said. I think it is best for everyone. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because the last piece had finally clicked into place. I returned to the buffet, lifted the cream envelope, and held it against my chest. Richard relaxed, thinking I was about to cry. Brooke leaned forward, hungry for surrender. Patricia looked almost sympathetic. I smiled then, not warmly, not cruelly, just enough to let them know the evening had changed owners. Then it is time, I said, for everyone to understand what this house actually is. I opened the cream envelope slowly, because people who expect you to fall apart become very uncomfortable when you handle paper with calm hands. Richard frowned first, then Brooke. Patricia only watched me, her face still arranged into sympathy, though her eyes had sharpened. I removed the first document and placed it on the coffee table on top of Brooke's retirement brochures. This is the deed to the house, I said. Not the summary Richard has been discussing. The actual deed. Brooke's lips parted. Richard gave a small, impatient laugh. Margaret, this is not necessary. It became necessary when you invited a guest to my table and let my daughter-in-law plan my address. The room went quiet except for the soft pop of wood in the fireplace. I placed the second document beside the first. This is the Whitaker Family Residence Trust, created by my father after Richard's business debts in 2006. The house was placed in that trust to protect it from creditors, bad decisions, and anyone who might confuse living here with owning it. Richard's face changed. Not completely. Just enough. A tiny draining of color beneath his cheeks. He remembered something then. Not everything, but enough to feel the floor shift under him. Brooke leaned forward. That does not mean what you think it means. I looked at her. I had Howard Miller explain it to me twice. Then I had another attorney in Harrisburg review it. It means exactly what I think it means. Daniel stepped closer to the table, reading the top page. Mom, he said softly, is this true? I did not look away from Richard. Your grandfather made sure this home would remain mine. Richard has the right to live here only as my husband, and only as long as he does not attempt to sell it, borrow against it, transfer it, or force me to leave. He cannot refinance it. He cannot use it as collateral. He cannot sign it over. And Brooke cannot move me to Florida with a folder and a smile. Brooke's face hardened. I was trying to help. No, I said. You were trying to make theft sound like care. Patricia set her glass down with both hands. The sound was small, but it betrayed her more than a shout would have. Richard stood halfway, then sat again, as if his own knees had changed their mind. Maggie, you are twisting this. I never meant to force you out. I removed the third paper from the envelope. Then why did Fulton Bank call me 3 weeks ago asking whether I had authorized your inquiry about a home equity line of credit? Daniel turned sharply toward his father. Brooke looked at Richard before she could stop herself. That one glance was worth more than any confession. I placed printed screenshots beside the bank note. And why did Brooke send Patricia an email saying, once Margaret agrees to leave, spring will be the best time to list or leverage the property? Patricia whispered, Brooke. It was the first honest thing she had said all night. Brooke went pale, then red. That was taken out of context. I have the full context, I said, including the kitchen hallway recording from tonight, where you explained that making me feel like a burden was the angle. Daniel covered his mouth with one hand and turned away. I could bear Richard's betrayal. I could bear Brooke's greed. But my son hearing the truth about his own silence was harder. Still, I did not soften it. Some lessons arrive late because we protect people from them too long. Richard stared at the documents as if they were strangers who had walked into his living room uninvited. You recorded us? He asked. No, I said. The security camera you asked Daniel to install recorded the hallway. I simply listened. The tree lights blinked red, gold, green, gold. Patricia reached for her coat on the arm of the chair, but she did not stand. Brooke folded her arms. Richard looked older than he had at dinner, smaller too, as if the room had quietly returned him to his actual size. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, leaving only the trust document open. You brought your past to my Christmas table, I said. So I brought the paperwork. No one spoke. For the first time all evening, the silence belonged to me. Richard looked at the open trust document for a long time, as if staring hard enough might change the words. Brooke was the first to recover, because greedy people often mistake volume for strength. This is unbelievable, she said. You sat there all night pretending everything was fine just so you could embarrass us on Christmas. I turned to her slowly. No, Brooke. Christmas was damaged the moment you planned where I would live after stealing my chair. Her mouth closed. Daniel made a sound then, low and broken, not quite an apology and not quite a breath. He looked at the folder of retirement communities, then at me, and for the first time all evening, he saw what I had been seeing for years. Not one cruel moment. A pattern. 1,000 small permissions he had given by staying quiet. Mom, he said, I did not know about the bank. I believed him. That did not make him innocent. You knew enough to look away, I said gently. He lowered his eyes, and that was the closest thing to truth he had offered me all night. Patricia stood, smoothing the front of her cream sweater with shaking fingers. I should go. Richard looked at her quickly, almost desperately. Patricia, wait. She did not look at him. That surprised me. Perhaps she had come expecting a lonely man with a house and a devoted family ready to clear space for her. Instead, she had found an old mistake sitting in the middle of a legal problem. No, she said quietly. I think I was told a version of things that was not complete. Brooke let out a bitter laugh. Now everyone wants to act innocent. I picked up Patricia's coat from the chair and handed it to her. You came into my home as a guest, I said. Leave as one. That is more courtesy than you offered me. Her face flushed, but she took the coat. At the doorway, she paused as if she might apologize. She did not. Some people can recognize shame before they can speak it. Richard remained by the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, his wedding ring catching the tree lights. Maggie, he said, and now the old nickname sounded tired instead of tender. We can talk about this privately. I looked around the room. The stockings, the garland, the photographs of vacations, graduations, anniversaries, all those frozen smiles proving we had existed before this night. You chose an audience, I said. Now you have one. His face tightened. What do you want me to do? That was the saddest question of the night. After 42 years, he still thought the answer was something he could perform quickly and be forgiven for. I folded the trust document and slid it back into the envelope. You are going to pack a suitcase. Tonight. You may take your clothes, your medication, and the personal items in your study. Howard Miller will contact you after Christmas about temporary arrangements. You will not contact the bank again. You will not ask Daniel or Brooke to pressure me. And you will not bring another woman into my home and expect me to serve dessert. Brooke stood. You cannot just throw him out. I looked at Richard. He said he wanted a fresh start. I am allowing him to begin it before midnight. No one laughed. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he seemed to understand that charm had no value in a room where paperwork had already spoken. He went upstairs slowly. Daniel followed him after a moment, not to defend him, but perhaps to make sure he understood the size of what he had done. Brooke gathered her folder with stiff, angry movements. You are going to regret turning the family against each other, she said. I almost smiled. A family is not broken by the person who names the betrayal. It is broken by the people who planned it over champagne. She left without saying goodbye. An hour later, Richard stood at the front door with one suitcase and his winter coat buttoned wrong. Snow had covered the porch steps. Daniel waited beside his car, silent and pale. Richard looked back at me as if expecting the woman I used to be to appear and rescue him from the consequences. She did not. I simply said, "Drive carefully." Then I closed the door. The house settled around me with a deep, unfamiliar quiet. Not empty. Mine. I walked back to the dining room, blew out the last candle, and moved my plate to the head of the table. For the first time in years, I sat there without asking anyone whether it was all right.